The people treated like background noise inside a building are usually the first to notice when the foundation starts cracking. Rain-soaked downtown shook them. Rain hammered harder against the steel delivery doors while freezing winds slipped through the loading bay every time another vendor truck arrived outside. Cole remained focused on the terminal screen while updating intake records manually. The signatures are required before activation inventory enters the sales floor, he answered evenly. Victor stepped closer until the sharp smell of expensive cologne mixed with cold rainwater reached across the cramped stock corridor. You know what your problem is? Victor asked loudly. You act like this place cannot function without you. Nearby employees suddenly became very interested in their barcode scanners. Victor pointed toward the crowded sales floor glowing beneath giant countdown screens preparing for midnight opening. Tonight is the biggest retail event of the year. If these products are not available by launch, I will personally make sure your employee badge stops working before sunrise. The words hung heavily inside the narrow corridor while receipt printers chattered non-stop near the customer service counters beyond the stockroom entrance. Cole slowly placed the terminal onto a rolling inventory cart and looked toward the rain-streaked loading doors where delivery lights flashed red against the wet alley outside. Understood, he said quietly. Victor smirked once, satisfied by what he interpreted as submission, before turning back toward the main floor where music, advertisements, and impatient shoppers already pressed against the glass entrance waiting for midnight. Around the store, employees resumed working beneath the relentless fluorescent glow, while distant thunder rolled somewhere beyond the skyline. Cole watched Victor disappear into the crowd of managers near the sales displays before glancing briefly toward the old freight elevator beside the receiving corridor. Most people inside Novatech believed the building belonged entirely to corporate headquarters in New York. That misunderstanding had survived for years because almost nobody ever bothered reading the original lease agreements attached to the property itself. Midnight arrived with a roar of sliding doors, wet boots, and thousands of impatient voices flooding into Novatech Electronics beneath flashing sale banners and giant countdown screens glowing electric blue across the sales floor. Chicago police barriers outside struggled to control the crowd stretching halfway down the block, while freezing rain mixed with sleet beneath elevated train tracks, rattling overhead through downtown. Inside the store, barcode scanners chirped non-stop beside self-checkout stations while employees in red company jackets rushed through packed aisles carrying gaming consoles, laptops, and box televisions balanced against their shoulders. The air smelled like overheated electronics, sugary pretzels from the food kiosk near the entrance, and damp winter coats steaming beneath the fluorescent lighting. Cole Bennett moved steadily between the stockroom and receiving corridor updating inventory releases through a handheld terminal, while forklifts rolled pallets toward the rear elevator connecting storage to the upper sales floor. Around him, managers shouted product locations into headsets, while receipt paper curled endlessly from registers near the front entrance. Black Friday transformed normal retail behavior into survival psychology, wrapped inside promotional pricing. Victor Kane thrived inside that chaos. He stormed through departments barking orders at exhausted workers, while regional sales numbers refreshed constantly across digital monitors suspended from the ceiling. Move faster, he snapped at a cashier struggling with a frozen payment screen near the smartphone display. Customers are not paying to watch you panic. The young employee looked seconds away from tears while holiday music continued playing absurdly cheerful songs through the overhead speakers. Nearby shoppers pretended not to notice. Cole passed through the crowded gaming aisle carrying updated stock manifests when a sharp electrical buzz echoed from somewhere above the loading docks. One of the overhead utility lights flickered twice before stabilizing again. He stopped briefly beside the freight elevator and studied the ceiling ventilation grates while vibrations traveled faintly through the old building frame beneath his boots. The infrastructure strain had started earlier than expected. Near the premium electronics counter, Victor argued loudly with a vendor representative over delayed inventory authorization codes, while customers gathered impatiently around locked display cabinets. I do not care what corporate protocol says, Victor snapped. Open the shipment now. The vendor shook his head carefully. Building intake clearance has not finalized. Victor pointed aggressively toward the sales floor packed shoulder to shoulder with customers. That stock needs to move immediately. Cole overheard the exchange while reviewing back-end access notifications on his terminal nearby. The vendor noticed him first. Can you verify the dock clearance status? Victor rolled his eyes dramatically before Cole could answer. Fantastic, he muttered. Now the stockroom ghost handles infrastructure too. Several nearby employees lowered their heads instantly, pretending to focus on inventory carts and packaging tape. Cole remained calm beneath the harsh fluorescent glow reflecting off polished tile floors crowded with shopping carts and tangled charging cables. Freight access remains limited until occupancy sensors rebalance load distribution, he answered evenly. Victor laughed once in disbelief. You hear this? He asked the vendor loudly. This guy talks like he owns the building. Around them, shoppers pushed through the aisles grabbing discounted tablets while children pointed excitedly toward giant television walls flickering with holiday advertisements. Somewhere upstairs, a pressure alarm chimed briefly through the maintenance system before cutting silent again. Cole glanced toward the old service corridor near the freight elevators where rust-colored pipes disappeared into the original basement structure beneath the store. Most of the corporate executives visiting from New York saw Novatech as another profitable downtown retail location. They never paid attention to the fact that the property itself existed long before the company ever leased it. And tonight, under Black Friday pressure, the building had started noticing how recklessly it was being managed. By 2:30 in the morning, Novatech no longer resembled a retail store. It felt more like an overheated transit station packed with restless strangers carrying discounted televisions, tangled charging cables, and armfuls of electronics beneath flashing promotional screens that never stopped pulsing across the ceiling. Outside, freezing rain coated downtown Chicago in silver, while emergency vehicles crawled through traffic beside crowds still lined along the block hoping inventory would last until sunrise. Inside the building, humidity from thousands of shoppers fogged sections of the front glass while exhausted employees moved carefully through narrow aisles littered with abandoned coffee cups, torn packaging, and scattered sales flyers soaked by melted sleet from winter boots. Cole Bennett stepped through the rear service hallway carrying updated intake records, while old heating pipes rattled faintly inside the walls surrounding the freight corridor. Somewhere below the main floor, the original basement ventilation system groaned under pressure from overloaded occupancy levels and non-stop delivery traffic cycling through the loading docks. Novatech executives rarely thought about infrastructure during Black Friday. They only measured sales volume. Victor Kane paced aggressively near the premium gaming section, while shouting into his headset at regional supervisors demanding hourly performance updates. I do not care if inventory counts are behind, he snapped. Push floor volume higher. Nearby employees exchanged tired looks while scanning merchandise beneath the cold white lighting reflecting off polished tile floors. One cashier rubbed her eyes repeatedly while trying to calm an angry customer, whose online pickup order vanished from the overloaded system queue. Another worker struggled to restock wireless accessories from half-open cartons, stacked dangerously near emergency pathways. Victor noticed the congestion and immediately turned his frustration toward the staff instead of the impossible conditions. Move those boxes now, he barked loudly. Do I have to do every job myself tonight? Cole arrived near the freight elevators just as one of the younger stock associates accidentally dropped a scanner onto the concrete loading ramp after nearly slipping on rainwater tracked inside from the delivery bay. Victor exploded instantly. Unbelievable, he shouted across the corridor. You people cannot handle basic responsibility for one night? The employee apologized quietly while crouching to retrieve the damaged scanner, his hands visibly shaking from exhaustion. Victor pointed toward the time clock near the rear hallway. Go home. You are done. Several workers froze after hearing it. The young associate looked stunned. Sir, I have been here since 10 yesterday morning. Victor shrugged coldly. Then maybe retail is too difficult for you. Cole stepped forward slightly beside the receiving terminal, while forklifts rolled through the dock entrance carrying more boxed inventory from waiting trucks outside. He has been covering 2 departments all night, Cole said evenly. Victor turned immediately toward him with visible irritation already building behind his eyes. Did I ask for commentary from warehouse support? The fluorescent lights above the loading corridor flickered once again, while a low warning tone echoed faintly through the building systems nearby. Cole glanced briefly toward the utility monitor mounted beside the freight elevator. Occupancy pressure alerts were climbing faster now. The emergency pathways are becoming overloaded, he said calmly. The building requires partial traffic redistribution before additional freight enters the floor. Victor laughed harshly beneath the noise of rolling pallets and receipt printers chattering somewhere beyond the stockroom entrance. "There it is again," he said loudly enough for nearby employees to hear. "The stockroom ghost pretending he runs operations." He stepped closer while cold air drifted through the open loading dock behind them, carrying the smell of diesel exhaust and wet asphalt into the corridor. "You know what your actual job is tonight?" Victor asked. "Keeping your mouth shut and moving boxes." Cole looked toward the overcrowded sales floor visible through the swinging stockroom doors where customers pressed shoulder to shoulder beneath massive holiday screens advertising impossible discounts every 30 seconds. Then he glanced once more toward the old utility monitor flashing amber warnings beside the freight elevator. Because Victor still believed pressure only existed on sales reports, he had no idea the building itself was already documenting every operational mistake being made inside it. By 4:15 in the morning, the freight corridors beneath Novatech felt hotter than the crowded sales floor above. Steam hissed through old radiator pipes running along the concrete ceiling, while the smell of overheated wiring mixed with wet cardboard and machine oil drifting from the loading docks below street level. Outside, freezing rain continued falling across downtown Chicago, rattling against metal service doors beside alleyways flooded with delivery trucks waiting to unload holiday inventory before sunrise. Cole Bennett moved through the basement utility corridor carrying a ring of maintenance keys and a flashlight while emergency occupancy warnings pulsed amber across the handheld operations monitor clipped to his jacket. Above him, thousands of customers still crowded the retail floors, pushing the building far beyond its recommended overnight load threshold. Most people upstairs never considered the fact that Novatech operated inside a renovated structure built nearly 90 years earlier, long before giant electronics retailers transformed downtown properties into non-stop commercial machines. Cole stopped beside an old steel archive cabinet tucked behind the utility office near the freight controls. Fluorescent bulbs buzzed weakly overhead, while water dripped rhythmically from condensation lines running beside the maintenance tunnel walls. He unlocked the cabinet and removed a thick binder labeled Bennett Commercial Holdings beneath layers of faded property inspection stickers and redevelopment permits dating back decades. Inside rested the original lease document signed when Novatech first occupied the building, after the city approved waterfront redevelopment incentives nearly 15 years earlier. Cole flipped carefully through yellowed pages while the utility monitor continued flashing occupancy pressure warnings. Beside him, the language remained exactly as his father designed it before his death. Emergency Operational Authority transferred temporarily to property stakeholders if tenant management violated staffing protections, occupancy safety conditions, or infrastructure compliance protocols during designated high-volume commercial events. Black Friday counted as one of those protected periods. Upstairs, Victor Kane continued pushing the building harder every hour. Cole heard footsteps approaching through the utility corridor before the basement door swung open sharply. Marissa Doyle, one of the exhausted overnight supervisors, stepped inside carrying 2 inventory clipboards and a paper cup of cold coffee. "There you are," she breathed. "Victor is losing his mind upstairs." Cole closed the lease binder calmly. "What happened?" Marissa rubbed tired eyes beneath the flickering utility lights. 2 registers crashed near home theater. Security blocked another entrance because occupancy alarms started triggering again. She lowered her voice slightly afterward. "Victor fired another employee." The words hung heavily between the rattling pipes and humming electrical panels surrounding the maintenance office. Cole slipped the binder back into the cabinet, while distant vibrations from the elevated train tracks rolled faintly through the old foundation beneath them. "Who?" Marissa hesitated briefly. "Jasmine." She asked for a 10-minute break after being on register almost 14 hours. Cole stared toward the concrete floor for several quiet seconds, while rainwater tapped against the basement ventilation shafts overhead. The lease conditions were no longer approaching violation territory now. Victor had already crossed into it. Marissa leaned against the utility desk beside stacks of old maintenance records. "Can I ask you something?" she said carefully. Cole looked toward her. "Why do building inspectors and contractors always ask for you specifically?" For the first time all night, a faint expression almost resembling amusement crossed his face. "Because some people pay attention to who actually keeps a place functioning." Upstairs, a loud burst of feedback crackled suddenly through the building speakers before cutting silent again. Somewhere beyond the basement ceiling, customers continued flooding through overcrowded aisles chasing holiday discounts beneath giant electronic billboards. Victor still believed he controlled the building because he controlled the staff schedule. But hidden inside the original lease agreements was a much older rule about power. The property itself always outranked the manager temporarily renting space inside it. Shortly after 5 in the morning, the sales floor finally began showing signs of exhaustion. Customers still crowded the aisles beneath oversized holiday displays, but the earlier frenzy had faded into something slower and heavier, shaped by fatigue, empty coffee cups, and overloaded shopping carts rolling across scuffed tile floors. Outside the front windows, dawn remained hidden behind low gray clouds drifting above Chicago while icy rain streaked across the glass in crooked silver lines. The store smelled like warm electronics, damp winter clothing, and the stale sweetness of cinnamon pretzels abandoned near checkout stations hours earlier. Employees moved more carefully now, their voices lower, their shoulders slumped beneath endless fluorescent lighting that flattened every color inside the building into pale shades of blue and white. Cole Bennett stood near the rear operations desk reviewing occupancy logs while emergency alerts continued stacking silently across the property management monitor beside him. Temporary staffing thresholds had already been exceeded for nearly 2 hours. Infrastructure warnings remained unresolved. Emergency egress pathways showed multiple documented obstructions. Every violation automatically archived itself within the building compliance network connected directly to the lease oversight system his father once designed. Upstairs, Victor Kane continued behaving as though intimidation could overpower physical reality itself. He marched through the appliance section berating employees while regional executives joined remotely through conference tablets mounted near customer service stations. "I want floor velocity higher," Victor demanded sharply while pointing toward slowing checkout lines. "Do not let customers stand still." Nearby workers exchanged exhausted glances but said nothing. Most had already learned survival inside Novatech meant enduring Victor until the shift ended. Near the loading corridor, another problem erupted when incoming freight pallets became trapped beside blocked emergency lanes after temporary storage racks overflowed from non-stop inventory intake. A maintenance contractor wearing an orange reflective jacket approached Victor cautiously with a clipboard tucked beneath one arm. "We need to clear the west access lane immediately," he explained. "Fire compliance sensors already triggered twice." Victor barely looked at him. "Then disable the alerts until morning." The contractor blinked once in disbelief. "Sir, that violates occupancy protocol." Victor stepped closer, visibly irritated after hours without sleep. "You work for this building. I work for the company paying to occupy it. Do what I said." Cole overheard the exchange from several yards away, while updating operational records near the freight elevators. The contractor noticed him immediately and lowered his voice slightly. "The property system is already escalating warnings automatically," he said carefully. Victor turned sharply toward Cole again, frustration tightening across his face beneath the harsh overhead lighting. "Why is he always standing around listening?" He snapped toward the nearby supervisors. "Does anyone here actually know what this guy even does?" Before anyone answered, another warning chime echoed softly through the building infrastructure network. This time the sound did not disappear immediately. Amber lights began flashing quietly across the rear compliance panel mounted beside the service elevators, while the old ventilation system shifted into temporary restricted airflow mode. Several employees looked toward the panel nervously. Victor scoffed dismissively. "Ignore it," he ordered. "We are not slowing down because some outdated building system wants attention." Cole studied the flashing indicators for several seconds before removing a folded document from the inside pocket of his jacket. The paper itself looked ordinary beneath the fluorescent lights, but the signatures across the bottom carried far more authority than anyone standing nearby realized yet. Because at exactly 5:12 that morning, Novatech officially crossed into documented lease breach territory under emergency Black Friday operating conditions. At 5:37 in the morning, the first group of regional executives arrived at Novatech wearing dark wool coats still damp from freezing rain outside while security barriers struggled to manage another wave of customers pouring through the front entrance beneath flashing Black Friday advertisements. Downtown Chicago remained wrapped in gray morning fog drifting between skyscrapers while holiday lights reflected across slick sidewalks crowded with shoppers carrying oversized electronics boxes toward waiting taxis and rideshare vehicles. Inside the store, the atmosphere had shifted subtly. Employees still moved through checkout lanes and crowded departments beneath the relentless fluorescent glare. But nervous tension now threaded through every conversation after repeated compliance alerts continued appearing across operational systems. Near the rear freight corridor, amber warning lights pulsed steadily beside the service elevators while ventilation restrictions slowed airflow through overloaded stock areas. Victor Kane stood near the operations desk speaking aggressively into a conference tablet, while two executives from corporate headquarters reviewed occupancy reports with visible concern. "The alerts are exaggerated," Victor insisted sharply. "We are handling record sales volume. That is all this is." One of the executives, a silver-haired woman named Diane Mercer, glanced toward the compliance panel blinking beside the freight elevators. "The property management network flagged 3 separate lease violations overnight," she replied evenly. Victor waved dismissively toward the crowded sales floor beyond the corridor. "This building is old. The systems overreact every holiday season." Cole Bennett stepped quietly from the utility hallway carrying a leather document folder beneath one arm, while rainwater drummed faintly against the loading dock doors behind him. Several maintenance contractors immediately straightened posture after noticing him approach. Diane turned toward Cole first. "You are the operations contact receiving escalation copies?" Cole nodded once. "Temporary property oversight liaison." Victor laughed under his breath before looking toward the executives. "You are seriously taking guidance from inventory support now?" Cole calmly opened the folder atop the operations desk while nearby employees slowed their work just enough to listen without appearing obvious. Inside rested the original lease compliance addendum, attached to Novatech's occupancy agreement for the property. Diane's expression changed almost immediately while reviewing the highlighted clauses. "Emergency operational authority transfer," she read quietly. "Protected commercial periods, staffing violations, occupancy obstruction." Victor frowned impatiently. "What exactly is this supposed to mean?" Cole looked toward the flashing compliance indicators beside the freight elevators where another warning tone echoed softly through the corridor. "It means the building temporarily overrides tenant management authority during documented safety breaches." Victor stared at him in disbelief. "You cannot be serious." One of the maintenance supervisors stepped forward carefully beside the loading dock entrance. "Sir, property operations already shifted overnight routing permissions 30 minutes ago." Victor looked around suddenly as several contractors and facilities personnel avoided eye contact with him for the first time all night. Diane continued reviewing the documents silently beneath the fluorescent lighting, while crowds upstairs surged through checkout lanes above the vibrating ceiling structure. "These clauses are enforceable?" she asked. Cole nodded calmly. "They were signed during redevelopment approval after the original ownership group retained emergency operational protections tied to the building itself." Victor's expression hardened immediately. "Who owns the property group?" The question hung heavily inside the corridor while forklifts rolled quietly past stacked inventory crates nearby. Cole closed the folder slowly before answering. "My family." Silence spread across the operations area beneath the humming lights and distant customer noise flooding down from the sales floor overhead. For the first time since Black Friday began, Victor Kane looked genuinely uncertain. Because the employee he spent the entire night humiliating had never actually worked beneath him at all. The shift in authority spread through Novatech more quietly than anyone expected. There was no dramatic announcement, no screaming confrontation, no security escort marching across the sales floor beneath flashing holiday advertisements. Instead, the building itself simply stopped responding to Victor Kane the way it had a few hours earlier. By 6:20 in the morning, freezing rain had finally weakened outside, leaving downtown Chicago wrapped in pale silver fog, while commuters moved carefully along sidewalks crowded with Black Friday shoppers carrying discounted televisions and coffee cups beneath glowing department store windows. Inside Novatech, exhausted employees continued helping customers through checkout lanes while soft holiday music drifted awkwardly above the noise of scanners, shopping carts, and receipt printers still running non-stop across the packed sales floor. Yet beneath that routine retail chaos, The operational structure had quietly changed. Cole Bennett stood beside the rear compliance station reviewing updated occupancy reports with Diane Mercer, while maintenance supervisors adjusted traffic flow barriers near overloaded departments upstairs. Around them, contractors who previously waited for Victor's approval now checked instructions directly with property operations instead. The difference became impossible to ignore when one of the freight coordinators approached Victor near the loading dock entrance carrying revised intake schedules. Property management capped additional inventory transfers until occupancy clears, the coordinator explained carefully. Victor stared at him in disbelief. I already approved those deliveries. The coordinator shifted uncomfortably before answering. Sir, authorization routing changed 30 minutes ago. Victor turned sharply toward Cole standing near the compliance monitors beneath the harsh fluorescent lighting. You changed operational control? He demanded. Cole remained calm while reviewing the latest safety notifications scrolling across the screen beside him. Temporary emergency authority transferred automatically under the lease structure after the violations were documented. Nearby employees pretended to stay focused on inventory carts and packing materials, but everyone listened now. Victor stepped closer, frustration visibly cracking through the confidence he carried all night. You work in a stockroom, he snapped quietly. You do not get to override management. Diane closed the lease folder beside the operations desk and looked toward Victor evenly. Actually, he represents the ownership group attached to the property compliance agreement. Silence followed immediately after that sentence. Even the loading dock noise seemed farther away for several seconds while freezing wind drifted through the partially open freight entrance carrying the smell of wet asphalt and diesel exhaust into the corridor. Upstairs, customers continued filling shopping baskets beneath giant electronic displays completely unaware that the operational hierarchy beneath them had shifted permanently before sunrise. Victor glanced around the corridor as reality slowly settled across his expression. Contractors answered Cole's questions first now. Maintenance vendors waited for his approval before adjusting systems. Even the building access terminal beside the freight elevators displayed property oversight credentials connected to Bennett Commercial Holdings across the monitor screen. Marissa Doyle arrived carrying updated staffing sheets and stopped briefly after noticing the silence surrounding the operations desk. Where should we reroute appliance traffic? She asked automatically while looking toward Cole instead of Victor. The moment landed harder than any public humiliation ever could. Victor noticed it too. Nobody announced the transition. Nobody needed to. Authority inside buildings like Novatech was never really about who shouted loudest during a crisis. It belonged to the people, capable of keeping the structure standing when pressure exposed every weakness hiding underneath it. By late morning, the storm finally passed over Chicago, leaving the city washed clean beneath pale winter sunlight reflecting across glass towers and rain-darkened streets surrounding the downtown retail district. Inside Novatech, the atmosphere no longer carried the frantic edge of survival that consumed the building overnight. Customers still wandered through discounted holiday displays beneath glowing electronic advertisements, but the sharp panic that had dominated the sales floor earlier had faded into something steadier now. Employees moved with less tension in their shoulders. Checkout lines flowed more evenly after occupancy controls stabilized traffic patterns throughout the store. Even the lighting somehow felt softer after hours of relentless fluorescent glare and emergency warning signals echoing through the infrastructure network. Cole Bennett stepped through the rooftop maintenance access door carrying 2 paper coffee cups while freezing wind rolled lightly across the top of the building overlooking downtown Chicago. The skyline stretched beneath low silver clouds drifting above the river, while distant train tracks hummed softly between blocks lined with department stores and office towers preparing for another holiday shopping weekend. Rooftop ventilation fans turned steadily nearby beside old brick utility structures left untouched from the building's original construction decades earlier. Victor Kane stood alone near the edge barrier staring down toward the crowded streets below with both hands shoved into the pockets of his dark overcoat. For the first time since Black Friday began, he looked exhausted instead of intimidating. Cole walked over quietly and placed one of the coffee cups beside him on the metal railing. Steam curled upward into the cold air between them. Victor glanced toward the cup but did not touch it immediately. Everyone downstairs knows now, he said finally. Cole leaned lightly against the railing while morning sunlight reflected across damp rooftops surrounding the district. People usually notice when systems stop. Protecting someone automatically. Victor gave a humorless laugh beneath his breath. You could have told me who you were from the beginning. Wind rattled one of the rooftop maintenance chains nearby while distant sirens echoed faintly through the city below. Cole looked out across the skyline before answering calmly. Would it have changed how you treated people? Victor did not answer right away. Down on the streets beneath them, shoppers crossed intersections carrying oversized retail bags beneath glowing holiday decorations already hanging from light poles throughout downtown. I was trying to keep the store alive, Victor muttered eventually. Cole nodded once. Pressure explains behavior sometimes. It does not excuse it. The sentence settled heavily between them while cold air swept across the rooftop carrying the faint smell of rain-soaked concrete and traffic rising from the avenues below. Victor rubbed tired hands across his face before speaking again. I fired people who had been awake almost 20 hours. Cole remained silent. I thought pushing harder solved everything, Victor admitted quietly. That is how corporate teaches managers to survive. Somewhere beneath the rooftop floor, the building's restored ventilation systems hummed steadily through stabilized corridors and balanced occupancy levels below. Cole studied the skyline for several seconds before finally answering. Buildings survive because infrastructure gets respected before collapse happens. People are not much different. Victor stared down toward the crowded sidewalks far below where holiday shoppers moved through the city, completely unaware of the overnight power shift that transformed Novatech from the inside out. For the first time in years, nobody downstairs feared Victor Kane anymore. And strangely, standing alone beneath the cold Chicago sky, he finally seemed relieved by that. 3 weeks after Black Friday, downtown Chicago glowed beneath early Christmas decorations stretching across the magnificent mile while soft snow drifted between traffic lights and crowded sidewalks filled with tourists carrying shopping bags through the cold evening air. Inside Novatech Electronics, the atmosphere felt completely different from the chaos that nearly broke the building before Thanksgiving. Checkout lines moved smoothly beneath calmer lighting displays. Employees spoke without the constant tension that once followed every mistake. Holiday music still floated softly through the store speakers, but now it blended naturally with ordinary conversations instead of frantic orders shouted across overcrowded departments. Corporate headquarters quietly reassigned Victor Kane to a non-operational consulting position, pending internal review, after the lease compliance violations triggered property oversight investigations throughout the district. Nobody celebrated publicly when the announcement arrived. Most employees simply kept working while relief settled quietly across the store like warmth returning after a hard winter storm. Cole Bennett stood near the restored freight corridor reviewing updated maintenance schedules, while snowflakes drifted past the loading dock windows overlooking the alley outside. The old building felt steadier now. Ventilation systems operated within safe capacity. Emergency pathways remained clear. Staffing rotations finally respected legal recovery requirements after overnight shifts. For the first time in years, the property itself no longer seemed strained beneath the weight of constant pressure and careless management decisions. Marissa Doyle approached carrying inventory reports and a paper bakery box tied with red string. "The morning team wanted you to have these," she said with a small smile. Inside sat several homemade cinnamon rolls still warm from a nearby cafe down the block. Cole looked genuinely surprised. "What is the occasion?" Marissa laughed softly. "You kept the place from collapsing during Black Friday." Around them, employees decorated the customer service counters with small strands of silver lights, while evening shoppers wandered through holiday sales beneath giant television screens glowing against the polished floors. Near the front entrance, the young stock associate Victor nearly fired weeks earlier now trained 2 new seasonal workers beside the gaming displays. Jasmine worked comfortably at customer service again after receiving additional paid leave approved through revised staffing policies. Small changes, quiet ones, but real. Cole carried the bakery box upstairs later that evening toward the rooftop maintenance access where snow collected lightly across the old brick surfaces overlooking downtown Chicago. The skyline shimmered beneath winter clouds while traffic moved slowly along streets glowing gold beneath holiday decorations and storefront reflections. He rested against the rooftop railing holding a cup of coffee as cold wind rolled gently across the city below. His father used to bring him there years earlier when the property still belonged mostly to small local businesses before luxury redevelopment transformed the district into corporate retail territory. Back then, the older man repeated the same lesson every winter while teaching Cole how buildings survived pressure. The people nobody notices are usually the ones holding everything together. At the time, Cole thought his father only meant maintenance crews, electricians, freight operators, and overnight workers moving quietly through structures most executives barely understood. Now he finally realized the lesson reached further than that. Respect itself was infrastructure. Ignore it long enough and eventually every system begins failing from the inside. Below the rooftop, Novatech continued glowing warmly against the snowy Chicago evening, while shoppers filled the streets preparing for Christmas. The store survived because someone finally chose responsibility over ego when the pressure became unbearable. And in the end, that mattered far more than who spent the longest time believing they were in charge.